What if the institutions you trusted the most, the ones designed to protect you and your family, made a choice that valued research over your life? What if, for decades, ordinary people were subjected to an experiment, not for their benefit, but for the sake of knowledge? This is not a story of dramatic battles, violence, or overt cruelty. It is a story of decisions made quietly, behind closed doors, that shaped generations. For 40 years, a secret experiment unfolded in the United States, hidden in plain sight. Lives were influenced, communities impacted, and trust betrayed. This is a story America tried to forget, but one that continues to resonate today. The early 20th century in the United States was a time of transformation. Cities expanded, technology progressed, and medicine promised a future filled with hope and solutions that had previously seemed impossible. Doctors and scientists were trusted implicitly. Government programs were viewed as benevolent institutions, promising care, oversight, and protection. For many, these institutions represented authority, security, and the promise of advancement. Yet beneath the surface of progress, certain social and racial inequalities persisted, particularly in the southern states. Communities of color were systematically marginalized, socially and economically, and often treated as secondary in the eyes of government and medical institutions. In this environment, the belief that some lives could be studied rather than protected took hold. People were seen not as individuals with dignity, but as data points in a pursuit of knowledge. It was in this complex social and ethical landscape that the United States Public Health Service initiated a study in Macon County, Alabama, in 1932. The study claimed to examine bad blood, a term broadly applied to several health conditions at the time. To the casual observer, the study appeared innocuous, an effort to better understand public health issues. In reality, it would become one of the darkest chapters in American medical history. This period was marked by a combination of optimism about science and deep-seated prejudice. The stage was set for a prolonged ethical failure, one that would challenge public trust in institutions and leave a legacy of moral lessons that are still relevant today. The Tuskegee Study, as it would later be known, was born from the intersection of ambition, racial bias, and the unchecked power of authority. The Tuskegee Study initially focused on a group of African American men, primarily poor sharecroppers, who were recruited under the pretense of receiving free medical care. They were told they would be treated for bad blood, a vague term that encompassed a range of ailments. Many participants trusted the doctors and the government to act in their best interests. They were assured that regular medical attention would improve their health and well-being. Families and communities supported the program, believing it was a legitimate public health initiative. Unbeknownst to them, the purpose of the study was not to provide treatment, but to observe the natural progression of untreated disease. Participants were never fully informed of the study's true goals, and informed consent, a cornerstone of ethical medical practice, was entirely absent. The men continued to report for checkups, faithfully following instructions, unaware that they were part of a decades-long experiment designed to withhold care in the name of science. The study's administrators framed the project in terms of public health advancement, presenting it as an opportunity to contribute to medical knowledge. However, the moral compromise at its core was clear: human well-being was secondary to observation. As the study progressed, the participants continued to trust the system, not realizing that the very institutions they believed would protect them were choosing to exploit their vulnerability. This breach of ethics laid the groundwork for what would become a prolonged and systemic failure. It demonstrated how power, authority, and racial prejudice could converge to allow human suffering to continue unchecked. In the decades that followed, the Tuskegee Study would come to symbolize the dangers of unchecked institutional authority and the critical importance of ethical oversight in medicine. As medical science advanced in the 1940s and 1950s, effective treatments became widely available for the very conditions being studied. Yet, the participants in the Tuskegee Study were deliberately denied these treatments. Doctors and administrators had a clear choice: provide the cure and end the study, or continue observing the natural progression of disease. They chose the latter. This was not due to a lack of knowledge or resources, but a calculated decision to prioritize observation over human life. Internal documents later revealed that officials were fully aware of the ethical implications. Meetings and reports demonstrated a bureaucratic coldness, an administrative resolve to continue the experiment despite knowing the consequences. Silence and inaction became policy. At every stage, those in authority made the conscious decision to withhold the truth from participants and the public. In doing so, they ensured that the study would continue uninterrupted, reinforcing the power imbalance between researcher and subject. This aspect of the Tuskegee Study is particularly chilling. Unlike other historical atrocities that are marked by dramatic acts of violence or overt cruelty, this failure was quiet, methodical, and institutionalized. It relied on procedural compliance and the authority of respected institutions rather than direct confrontation. The harm it caused was psychological and systemic, affecting participants, their families, and the broader community. Trust, once given, was systematically eroded. Over the decades, generations of participants lived without knowing the full truth. The study continued for 40 years, spanning multiple administrations and shifts in public policy. The choice to maintain secrecy reflected a broader societal failure, one rooted in racial prejudice, bureaucratic ambition, and a disturbing willingness to prioritize data over human welfare. It is a stark reminder of how institutional silence can perpetuate injustice, and how decisions made behind closed doors can ripple across decades. The impact of the Tuskegee Study extended far beyond the men directly involved. Families, communities, and even medical institutions felt its long shadow. Trust in the healthcare system eroded slowly but persistently, as the realization of betrayal spread through affected communities. The study created an atmosphere of suspicion that lasted for generations. It wasn't violence or disaster that left this legacy, it was quiet, unacknowledged harm that undermined faith in public institutions. For the men themselves, everyday life continued under the weight of ignorance. They participated in the study, believing in its promises, while unknowingly enduring a breach of trust that would shape their understanding of authority and medicine. Their faith in institutions that were meant to protect them was misplaced, and the consequences reverberated through their families, influencing how they approached healthcare and civic participation. This long shadow also affected the broader public perception of medical ethics in America. Once the study came to light, it revealed how social and racial prejudices, combined with institutional power, could allow ethical violations to persist for decades. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority, the importance of informed consent, and the moral responsibility of institutions to protect those they serve. In many ways, the Tuskegee Study forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about race, medicine, and ethics. It underscored how silence and inaction can inflict as much harm as deliberate wrongdoing. And it left a lasting lesson: the choices made in offices, committees, and bureaucratic meetings have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. The truth about the Tuskegee Study did not emerge gradually, it was thrust into the public eye by the diligent work of investigative journalists in the early 1970s. These journalists uncovered documents, conducted interviews, and revealed the reality that for 40 years, hundreds of men had been observed without their knowledge and, critically, had been denied treatment for a curable disease. The exposure ignited shockwaves across the country. Americans were stunned. Many could not fathom that a study sanctioned by the United States government had continued for so long, affecting real lives under the guise of medical research. Outrage spread quickly, not only among the general public but also within the medical community. Doctors, scientists, and ethicists grappled with the fact that colleagues in institutions they respected had violated fundamental ethical principles. Professional organizations demanded answers, and news outlets carried the story into households nationwide, prompting debates on morality, accountability, and the limits of governmental authority. Government hearings followed. Senators and representatives questioned officials who had overseen or condoned the study. The public demanded explanations. How could this happen? Who had known? And why had it been allowed to continue for decades without intervention? These hearings were tense and meticulous, exposing bureaucratic decisions that had ignored human dignity in favor of research continuity. The narrative of scientific progress was challenged, revealing the profound consequences of prioritizing data over humanity. For the participants and their families, the exposure was bittersweet. Relief came in the form of acknowledgement and apology, but it could never erase the decades of lost opportunities for treatment, health, and peace of mind. Communities struggled to process both the betrayal and the wider implications. If trusted institutions could act in this way, what did it mean for the broader social contract between citizens and government? This public reckoning highlighted the deep, long-term effects of institutional silence, emphasizing that ethical failures in research could reverberate far beyond their immediate context. The exposure of the Tuskegee Study marked a turning point in American medicine, public policy, and ethics. Its end triggered widespread reforms designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. One of the most significant outcomes was the formalization of the concept of informed consent. No longer could participants be enrolled in research without fully understanding the purpose, risks, and benefits of a study. Consent became an explicit, documented, and legally required process, serving as a safeguard for human rights and dignity. Additionally, the federal government implemented ethical oversight mechanisms to protect participants in research programs. Institutional review boards, IRBs, were established, tasked with evaluating research proposals, ensuring adherence to ethical standards, and monitoring studies for compliance. These safeguards reflected the nation's recognition that progress in science must be balanced with moral responsibility. The lessons of Tuskegee became foundational, influencing medical schools, universities, and research institutions across the country. Beyond legal and institutional reforms, the Tuskegee Study profoundly shaped public discourse about ethics, justice, and race in America. It exposed the ways systemic inequality could be embedded into scientific programs, revealing that social prejudices could distort decisions at the highest levels. The experiment became a symbol of the consequences of prioritizing knowledge over human life, and it fostered a national conversation about accountability, transparency, and moral obligation. In the 1990s, decades after the study concluded, the United States formally apologized. This apology acknowledged wrongdoing, recognized the suffering of the participants and their families, and attempted to repair some of the harm done. Yet, it also served as a reminder that legal remedies and formal acknowledgments, while important, cannot entirely undo the consequences of long-term ethical failures. The legacy of Tuskegee is enduring. It underscores that vigilance, oversight, and the courage to speak up are essential in protecting human dignity. The story of the Tuskegee Experiment is not confined to history books, it remains profoundly relevant today. It invites us to reflect on the nature of trust, authority, and accountability. What happens when institutions hold unchecked power? How do systemic biases influence decision-making in ways that can harm entire communities? And most importantly, how do we, as individuals and as a society, ensure that moral responsibility is never secondary to ambition or convenience? In modern medicine, ethics boards, informed consent protocols, and rigorous oversight mechanisms exist because of this dark chapter. Yet the lessons extend far beyond the laboratory. They touch on civic engagement, public policy, and the broader social contract. They remind us that silence, compliance, and passive observation can sometimes be as damaging as direct action, and that it is the responsibility of every citizen, researcher, and policymaker to question, investigate, and demand transparency. The Tuskegee Study also highlights the intersection of race and ethics in America. By understanding how systemic prejudice shaped decisions, we gain insight into larger societal patterns and inequities that continue to influence public institutions. It compels us to examine historical and contemporary structures of power, prompting ongoing dialogue about justice, fairness, and human dignity. Perhaps the most powerful lesson is that history, even when uncomfortable or shameful, must be remembered. Forgetting or ignoring past failures allows them to persist in subtle ways. By bringing the Tuskegee Experiment to light, reflecting on its implications, and learning from it, we engage in a form of collective accountability. This process strengthens institutions, promotes ethical vigilance, and, most importantly, honors the lives of those who suffered due to silence, negligence, and prejudice. History is not merely a record of events. It is a testament to the choices humanity makes, good, bad, and everything in between. The Tuskegee Experiment stands as a reminder that moral failure is often silent, bureaucratic, and slow-moving, yet its impact can be profound and enduring. It teaches us that trust is fragile, that ethics must guide progress, and that awareness and reflection are crucial for a just society. Some chapters of history are uncomfortable, even painful, yet remembering them is essential. At Dark Chronicles History, we aim to shed light on these moments, not to sensationalize, but to educate, reflect, and preserve the lessons they offer. Because when history is ignored, it does not disappear, it waits, shaping the future in quiet but powerful ways. Thank you for joining us. Remember, the darkest chapters often contain the brightest lessons, and understanding them helps us build a more just, ethical, and informed world.
Thanks for watching.